All right, one of my favorite ones here is knowing what's happening in your system. Who done it? This is a good story that I'm sure Sherlock Holmes or Dick Tracy would have loved to solve. But today we're actually going to solve it with two very simple things, right? It could be what happened. It could be what can happen. I'll do what happened. I'll let Mark do the what can happen. So the what happened in the monolith world, before you start externalizing authorization, you kind of rely on trying to make sense of the logs you have left and right. The app logs, maybe your proxy logs, your API gateway logs, but it's kind of hard to make sense of what is actually happening, what people are actually asking for, and what they're getting. With an externalized authorization service, with an externalized policy decision point, you get that PDP's audit log, and that audit log is going to contain the request that it the request that it received and the response it returned, and potentially additional information like which policies were used and how they were evaluated, and like a bunch of different varying degrees of metadata about the evaluation. But the bottom line is you can start building a couple of different things. First of all, you can start building the number of denies and the number of permits you got in the system. You could do some analytics of whether your system is under attack. If you see 1 million denies in the span of 1 second on a Sunday morning at 3 a.m. from the same user, you could start thinking that maybe that user is up to something no good, or maybe their credentials were stolen, right? So you can do a lot of these analysis. You could also do heat maps of which parts of your policies are being used and realize that some of your policies are never being used. And that could be an indication that you didn't really write good authorization policies to begin with, or it could be an indication that the particular use case that branch was protecting just never occurs. So it might be that your application no longer has that feature, or is a seldom used feature, and that can give you insights into how you want to further develop your apps and APIs. So that's what can happen. Oh, sorry, what did happen, what happened. And really, I can't recommend enough that customers use SIEM tools, Splunk, ELK, whatever it may be, to analyze those logs, because they are a treasure trove of information. And that brings us to what can happen, Mark.
Right. So as opposed to in the what has happened, you're looking at logs. As when you get to what can happen, you're looking at the policy itself. So we can actually interrogate the policy and find out what it's capable of. What is it permitting? What is it denying? So we can ask questions like, what can Alice do? And then if you start automating this, right, you can ask about all your employees and all your customers. Now that list would get pretty long, but it's definitely possible to produce that information user by user. You can also ask, you say, based on a role, hey, what does an intern have access to? So you can look at that output, and if you find out the answer says, well, the intern can look at the company secrets, then you know you've got a problem in your policy, which you could also catch in testing. But again, there's also testing in layers, security in layers here. And you can turn these questions around and say, well, all right, who has access to company secrets? You can see the user characteristics. You can say, what actions can someone perform on the company secrets? You can turn this question around any way you want. But the point is you're interrogating the policy to understand what it's allowing and what it's permitting. So it's a way to audit the policy itself.